This is the Ole Miss best case scenario close to the transfer portal right now.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast, hosted by me, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member as well. On today's show, we're diving into three key names that every Ole Miss fans need to keep an eye on in the transfer portal. We'll start with defensive back Thaddeus Dixon, the one player in the portal who can stack up against last year's big three of Walter Nolan, Princely Amanuel, and Trey Amos. We'll break down what we know about Dixon's recruitment so far. Then we'll shift focus to Brandon Cisse and Ben Bell as Lane Kiffin and the Rebels look to close out strong on the defensive side of the ball for the upcoming season. Locked On Ole Miss is free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. And a special shout out to the insiders and everydayers who make this show what it is. Don't forget to find a second listen. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC or even Corey Burton at Vandy. They have great college takes on college football, the SEC, and even Ole Miss. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So this is really interesting. There's about, a week until school starts in the spring semester at Ole Miss, and then the drop ad date is about 8 days after that. So that's kind of the length that is remaining in the spring semester version of the transfer portal. And Ole Miss is starting to look at areas to close out, and they're looking to close out pretty strong if we're going to be honest with it. And there's three names that I think Ole Miss fans need to know in this close. And Ole Miss is going to work at them. They might not get them, but they are recruiting them right now. And heck, by the time you hear this podcast, and in between then and the time now that I'm recording, some news could pop and could change everything. But these are the three names that you likely need to know what's going on. My take is these three names are going to give Ole Miss the close that Ole Miss needs in 2025. And the first name on the list is Thaddeus Dixon. Thaddeus Dixon is a defensive back in the mold of a Trey Amos. He is the defensive back, the player in the transfer portal that is actually comparable to the Walter Nolans, Princely Amanuelans, and Trey Amos that Ole Miss brought in a year ago. We all know what Trey Amos did, to where he essentially locked down a side of the field and just allowed the defense to work because of what was going on. Trey Amos was invaluable to the Ole Miss defense. So Pete Golding and Lane Kiffin are naturally trying to find another Trey Amos. It makes sense. And that led them to Washington and Thaddeus Dixon, who last year had 26 solo tackles, 10 passes broken up, and an interception in 2024, what came on. He is a guy that has all sorts of ability to be a top shelf level player for Ole Miss football at the cornerback position and help out the other players in the defensive back. We're going to talk about this defense a little bit in the second segment and a couple other players that Ole Miss are recruiting really hard right now too. But the alpha dog recruit that Ole Miss is recruiting right now is probably Thaddeus Dixon. Now, the way it's set up, whenever he jumped into the transfer portal, all of a sudden he was being recruited by Washington to return, by Michigan, and by Ole Miss. Those are kind of the three names that it whittled down to. Now, in the transfer portal, things can change in the drop of a hat. It's absolutely nuts. I'm absolutely certain that Ole Miss thought they were getting Justice Haynes. That's one of the reasons they kept the Trey Hall information under wraps. And then Justice Haynes went on the visit, everything got done, and then once other visits started happening, Justice Haynes ended up at Michigan. Ole Miss ended up with Trey Hall. Ole Miss ended up with Jordan Simmons. Ole Miss is going to be fine offensively in the transfer portal, but I'm just wanting to point out that in the portal, things can change in a hurry, and you might think you're sitting absolutely pretty, and it could turn in the drop of a hat. There's really no such thing as being wrong in the transfer portal because it can change so quickly. Thaddeus Dixon, though, whenever he entered the portal from Washington, Ole Miss buzz started happening immediately. Michigan buzz started happening immediately, and everybody was trying to make that work. And it came into Washington's going to fight to keep him, and then those two schools kind of became the dominant programs around him at the moment. I don't know how to word that exactly, but Thaddeus Dixon visited Ole Miss. People saw him at the Ole Miss LSU game sitting courtside. He apparently had a really good visit. He brought his dad on the visit to Ole Miss. Ole Miss showed him video of Trey Amos, and he really enjoyed that because that's a situation. In his mind, and this is just his mind, he's coming in here as a one-year rental. Trey Amos came to Ole Miss as a one-year rental, and that rental is probably going to be a first or an early second-round draft pick. This is a big feather to put in Ole Miss's cap defensively of what they can learn from Pete Golding and things like that. And as Ole Miss looks to rebuild their secondary at the moment, Thaddeus Dixon would be a nice piece to put up what's going on. Now, if you look at the other players in the secondary, Jalen Braxton, the cornerback that's transferring up from Arkansas, there's rumors for Brandon Cisse. There's Antonio Kite. There's a lot of corner-level players that Ole Miss has brought in. But remember, Pete Golden takes corner-level players and makes safeties out of them. Look, see John Saunders, see Yam Banks. They're going to be playing inside. So we don't know exactly what the idea is. We can assume that Thaddeus Dixon, though, is the field cornerback. He is the Trey Amos of this class. Ole Miss is going to work for ways that they can improve the defensive line, and we're going to talk about that in the next segment. They're going to look at ways that they can bring other defensive back help into the room. We'll talk about that in the next segment. But Thaddeus Dixon is a really good player with an extremely high ceiling. And if Ole Miss brings him in, that's one step closer to making this defense resemble what it did a year ago. And if Ole Miss can do that, I've talked about this pretty much since the end of the season in 2026. This season for Ole Miss is real similar to what Tennessee's was last year. And going into next season, Tennessee on the cusp of the playoffs. Nobody's really talking about them as a playoff threat. But if they realized that if they won some games and did some things, they had a chance to get there. Tennessee ended up making the playoffs. Ole Miss is kind of in that same boat right now. We talked to some people about some changes that are potentially being made and things like that. And they mentioned that, hey, the offense might look a little bit different next season. And that isn't against Austin Simmons. That isn't against Jackson Dart. That is just trying to maximize the strength of an Austin Simmons. And you can see almost bringing in tight end after tight end after tight end and all of this. And you're like, whoa, okay, this might be actually about to happen. On the defensive side of the ball, they're trying to find an alpha dog at all three levels. That's what Pete Golding does. Find an alpha dog at cornerback, find an alpha dog at linebacker, and find an alpha dog on the defensive line that you can bring into your room. I'm not talking about what's already there. So Pete Golding is trying to go out and do a trifecta of defensive backs, of high-level cornerbacks, including a couple of them with multiple years of eligibility. At linebacker, you have like Andrew Jones and Jaden Yates playing, the two dudes at the middle part of that defense, and you need to find somebody in the front part of that defense, and we'll talk about that in just a second. You know, two names to know on the Ole Miss side of the defense is edge star Ben Bell and versatile defensive back Brandon Cisse. The Rebels are making a strong push, but will they land these key targets? Stay tuned. We'll find out. You know, attending the new 12-team college football playoff games, it's an unforgettable experience. It truly brings fans together. I can still feel the excitement of past playoff games. And with this updated format and extra teams in the mix, it's going to be bigger and better than ever. I can't wait to make these new memories. And when it comes to snagging tickets for these games, Game Time has you covered. Their new feature, Game Time Picks, makes it easier than ever to find tickets to the big game. It cuts through the clutter and shows you only the best deals for great seats, saving you time and effort. I recently used Game Time Picks to get tickets for an upcoming game, and let me tell you, it was so simple. I browsed through some amazing deals and found a super deal which offered the best value for the event. One of my favorite parts, honestly. I could check out the seats before I bought the tickets, and the app showed exactly what the price would be up front. No surprise fees at checkout. Plus, with their on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee, I feel totally confident with my purchase. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, all one word, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So Thaddeus Dixon wasn't the only player that got brought in on the weekend. Some other players that have visited Ole Miss recently that is going through their decision process is defensive end Ben Bell and cornerback Brandon Cisse. Brandon Cisse was a sophomore this year, just like Jaden Braxton was as well. Ben Bell, a one-and-done level defensive lineman from Texas State. In 2023, had 10 sacks, had a sack this year against Arizona State. He kind of looks like he got hurt in September, and because of that, he only played 4 games, decided to redshirt, enter the transfer portal. And Brandon Cisse, he did not play much in October, but he's a pretty good player, had a pick against Miami a year ago. So here's the stats for Ben Bell. He's the guy that we've talked about 2 or 3 times on this podcast. He is a guy that has 126 tackles for his career, 31 tackles for loss, 2 passes defended, and 19 sacks. He's an extremely high motor guy. He high school prep careered in Texas. Whenever you look at this guy, what he needs, he is the perfect fill-in my opinion, to back up Suntarine Perkins. Because remember, this year, whenever you're looking at the transfer portal and players coming in, last year, Ole Miss needed a Walter Nolan. Last year, Ole Miss needed a Princely Amamielin. Last year, Ole Miss needed a Trey Amos. The defensive needs this year are a little bit different. So this guy, Princely Amamielin's replacement, is probably Suntarine Perkins. He's on the roster already. So you are looking for somebody to be the Suntarine Perkins, somebody to spell and give you a little bit of effort, to allow the versatility in your defense to make things difficult on these offensive units. And Ben Bell kind of fits that to a T. He's an extremely high motor guy. He's going to make all the plays in the world. And there might not be a Walter Nolan in this year's transfer portal. There might not be a J.J. Pegues in this year's transfer portal. But Ole Miss does have the benefit of having Jam Brown, of having Akello Stone, of having Xavion Harris, of having William Eccles, of having Cam Franklin, of having Jeffrey Rush, of having Cam Beavers, this big defensive line class that are going to be sophomores. Ole Miss does have that advantage. So you are looking at pieces that you are hoping that can fill in just a little bit. And these young guys, you think you're waiting on them to take the next step. They have the talent, they have the ability, and you have some guys like Xavion Harris that's played a ton of football, guys like Akello Stone that's played a ton of football, Jam Brown, a freshman All-American. You can feel good about the defensive line. You just need that little bit of extra of getting to the quarterback, and Ben Bell would provide that. Like I said, 2023 had 10 sacks that year. I think he had 2 in 4 games in 2024, including one against Arizona State. And we saw the Texas-Arizona State game, exactly how hard it is to get to Sam Leavitt from time to time. Now, the next player that we want to talk about is Brandon Cisse. He's a cornerback out of North Carolina State, transferring. The rumor is that North Carolina State's trying to bring and coax his brother into the program to keep him around. They really like Brandon Cisse as a player. He got an interception against Miami in 2023. He did not play in the month of October this year, which means he likely got hurt. He did not have the same impact in the second half of the season as he did in September. September was pretty good, like 2 or 3 passes defended against Clemson, played really well against pretty good competition early on. They played Tennessee and Clemson, 2 playoff teams in September, and he performed relatively well. Brandon Cisse is a sophomore. If you want to look at the eligibility clock, and he is somebody that can help you out at multiple positions along the defense. Remember, I talked about this in the first segment. Pete Golding is a guy that goes out and finds cornerbacks and figures out ways to use them in different areas. You saw that with John Saunders. John Saunders became one of the most important players on that defense, playing a safety position. He came to Ole Miss as a cornerback from Miami of Ohio. So whenever you look at Antonio Kite, Jalen Braxton, if it's a Brandon Cisse, Thaddeus Dixon, although I think Thaddeus Dixon's in the Trey Amos mode, those guys, they are going to populate the back part of that defense. And also, you need to keep in mind a little bit on what's going on. The players that got recruited, the Keon Young, has a chance to be an all-world free safety for Ole Miss. LaDarian Clardy, Ole Miss recruited him. I saw Cortez Thomas at the Under Armour All-American game. This is a guy that was an alpha dog on the field. There are options on the back part of that defense. Some of them might be young, but players like TJ Banks and players like that might be ready to ascend to the next step. Brandon Cisse at corner, we'll see exactly how that goes. Remember, Ole Miss is returning Chris Graves and Cedric Beavers, potentially Cedric Beavers after the Diego Pavia ruling with 3 years of eligibility. So there's a chance the back part of that defense could be pretty good. People are wondering exactly how it's going to fit together. I don't know that you need to worry about the back part of that defense. I do not know that you need to worry about the talent evaluation of Pete Golding. It's not the same situation as it was in 2024, to where you brought in 3 basic freaking free agent stars, essentially, and set them at 3 levels of your defense and said, let's go. You don't need that at this point. And you're probably going to take a little bit of a step back defensively. I'm not saying you're not. I'm saying you can. You were good enough for that this year. If it wasn't for some crazy analytic stuff to where you were kept going forward inside the 20, you still likely would have won those 3 games. Analytics basically kept Ole Miss out of the playoffs this year. Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if it can even be doubted, but it is what it is. On the defensive side of the ball, I like the way it's set up. If Ole Miss can land Thaddeus Dixon, Brandon Cisse, and Ben Bell, you have a transfer portal class that's on par with last year. Now, you're not the top-heavy stuff. There's no Walter Nolan. There's no Princely Amon Mielen, but you are in really good shape. You're looking at what could absolutely happen. You're going to finish at the top or near the top, 1 or 2 in the Southeastern Conference in recruiting. The transfer portal, everything is going, honestly, according to plan. And this was probably the best case, if it happens, the best case close in the transfer portal for Ole Miss. So we'll see exactly how that goes as well. You know, coming up in our final segment, we dive into Ole Miss basketball's toughest challenge yet as they face Alabama tonight in Tuscaloosa. Can the Rebels rise to the occasion? Don't miss the preview. You know, after the holiday hustle, there's nothing better than giving your home a little TLC. For me, decluttering and refreshing my space always helps me kind of reset and get back into a routine. If you're looking to tidy up, clear out, or give your space a new look to kick off the new year, Wayfair has everything you need, all while staying within your budget. You know, recently I was shopping for furniture to upgrade my living room, and Wayfair's huge selection made it so easy to find pieces that fit both my style and budget. The best part, free and hassle-free delivery, even for larger items like coffee tables and bookshelves. The website was so user-friendly, and I loved how quickly I found everything I needed without any stress. Wayfair makes it simple to turn home goals into reality. So give your home the refresh it deserves with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com today. That is WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. All right, so tonight Ole Miss takes on the Alabama Crimson Tide in Tuscaloosa. And this is by far the toughest test that Ole Miss has had this season. Alabama is going probably somewhere around 5 or 6 in the country, and they are a team that, and I talked about this yesterday, you could be at the under 8 timeout, and the game is 25-24, and you're playing pretty well, and you're beating Alabama by 1 point. By the under 4 timeout, you could be down by 15 points. That is the way that Alabama plays, and they're really difficult to deal with. So you have to be careful with this basketball team. When you look at the keys to winning this game, get off to a quicker start versus Alabama. Ole Miss cannot survive a slow start that they've had the previous 3 games against Alabama. Alabama scores too well. They just score the ball too well to allow that to happen. If you get off to a slow start, it won't be 11-1. It might be 22-2 or something like that. So Ole Miss has to get off to a quicker start and kind of be engaged into the basketball game. The other thing is 3-point defense. Ole Miss needs to really clamp down on the 3-point shots from Alabama. That's how they build their leads. They are basically, everybody talks about 3-level scores and all that. Well, Alabama's a 2-level scores and they're happy with it. It is threes and layups, and they will put up threes all day long. You need to make them at a lesser clip than they normally do. You need to make it to where you can go on runs from time to time to counteract their quick runs that they're going on. And also, this kind of feels like a Matthew Morel 20-point game is needed for Ole Miss to pull this out as well. So the players that I'm watching tonight is Malik Dia, who is kind of an SEC play, become the alpha dog of Ole Miss offensively. I want to see what he does in this game. Sean Padula, if he can shoot the ball pretty well, and Matthew Morel, he needs to score the ball against Alabama. We'll see how it goes. This Alabama team is really, really good. Now, I do not think they're Auburn, and I don't necessarily think they're Tennessee, but it's like whenever you ran across a good Service Academy style offense in football. Like when Georgia Tech was really clicking with Paul Johnson running that Service Academy style offense in Atlanta. Whenever they were clicking, there's not a lot that you could do about it. It was so weird. And Alabama offensively, because they rely so heavily on the 3-point shot and they use the analytics so much, they can pressure you in certain ways. Now, if it doesn't work, if you're able to guard the 3-point line, if you're able to rim protect at a certain level, you have a chance to go on more runs than you normally would. You might see 3 or 4 10-0 runs for Ole Miss in this game. But if Alabama gets going and is allowed to shoot their 3-point shots, it will be problematic. Now, this is going to be an unbelievably difficult game. Alabama is without a doubt the best team that Ole Miss has played so far. And Ole Miss has played Purdue. Ole Miss has played Illinois. This Alabama team is really good. They have Grant Nelson. They have Sears. They have a bunch of guys on the outside that can shoot the ball, and they play really quick. Now, they are known to have some defensive lapses from time to time. Ole Miss needs to take advantage of them. But this is one of those games that Ole Miss doesn't necessarily match up with Alabama because in a lot of cases it turns into 3 for 2. If Alabama is allowed to shoot the 3-point shot really well. Now, Ole Miss played 1 game on the road in the SEC this year, and they fell behind 11-1, and they were able to fight back because, let's be honest, Arkansas right now is not very good. But if you do that against Alabama, it's a death wish. Alabama has run teams out of their own gym already. Texas A&M was able to fight them to losing by 6, but Alabama was able to win that game. So whenever you look at the way this game is going to go, this is the way I have it set up. I've got Alabama winning 89-78. And I don't know how the game is going to look and how it's going to play out. I don't know if it's a situation where Alabama was up more than that and Ole Miss gets to the 78, or Alabama goes on a brief run at the end. I don't know. I hope it's the latter of what's going on, but Ole Miss needs to shoot the ball very well, have excellent perimeter defense and rim protect, and they will have a decent shot to do. Now, do not let Alabama just rebound you into oblivion. That's the other thing. You cannot give this Alabama team second chance points. You can't. If they miss a three, you need to rebound one shot and they're done. And if Ole Miss can do that, they will be in it. But it's going to be extremely difficult to win a game at Coleman Coliseum at Alabama. Extremely difficult. And with this Ole Miss team, hey, they won at Arkansas. They beat Georgia. That Georgia win is looking really good because Ole Miss is Georgia's only SEC loss. They have a win over Kentucky. So that was a good Georgia basketball team, at least in the early part of the season. And LSU, they're 0-3 in the conference. Arkansas is 0-3. But a large part of why Arkansas is 0-3 is because Ole Miss played well in the second half. Because other than that, Arkansas has lost to Tennessee and Florida. There's no shame there. So we'll see exactly how that goes for Ole Miss over the next little bit. All right. Thank you very much for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the number one Ole Miss podcast out there and the Ole Miss morning show of choice. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On SEC podcast. Host Chris Gordy holds no punches, covering the best conference in college sports. Find the Locked On SEC YouTube channel wherever you listen to podcasts. Hotty toddy, everyone. And remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. See you tomorrow.